Hello, this is Dr. Davis, and today we're talking in lecture 3. I guess I should start there. Today we're talking about attention and perception, um, and these are very important topics in consumer behavior. First of all, we want to know how you perceive things, or how the consumer, I should say, perceives things, and kind of how the consumer and why the consumer pays attention to things, because ultimately we want to influence those things. How do you perceive billboards? How can we make you pay attention, or influence you, I should say, pay attention to billboards? What catches your eye when you walk down the aisle of the supermarket, or of a beauty aisle, or a body wash aisle, or what catches your eye on television, right? So we can look at attention and perception from an advertising standpoint, when we look at kind of television advertisements, or magazine advertisements. We can also look at purchase behaviors in actual stores. There are so many ways we can use information about perception and attention, and so that's why it's such an important topic in consumer behavior. So hopefully you'll find something interesting in today's lecture, and if not, just know that some of this will be on the test. Okay, so let's just get started. So marketing isn't as bad as management when it comes to needing a model, but we do have models. And this is the information processing model. It says that we have these inputs, which we would consider the environment. Again, we're exposed to information, we attend to it, we perceive it, we comprehend it. It goes into our memory, which we call, knowledge. And then we integrate it with things we already know, and we get these outputs. And these outputs are considered judgments, choices, and behaviors. So this is the information processing model, and this, I think, stands up to the test of time. This has been pretty true for a long time. Sensation. So sensation is the immediate response of our sensory receptors, our eyes, our nose, our mouth, our fingers, those kind of things, your mouth, to basic stimuli like odor, texture, taste, sound, color, so on and so forth. And the way that it typically works is that we have our sensory stimuli, which of course are, our taste, our smell, our sound. We have our sensory receptors, our eyes, our nose, our mouth, our skin that accept that stimuli. And then we, from that point on, have exposure, attention, and interpretation. In one of the first slides, we talked about the fact that to be exposed to something, our senses have to pick that something up, right? So exposure first starts with our senses and our sensory systems. So I'll talk a little bit about each of our sensory systems. The first, vision. What's really interesting about vision is that 80% of what we receive from our environment is gained from vision. All senses are important, but vision is extremely important, right? So if we think about, for example, this is a tangent, but if we think about someone who is blind, the amount that they're not receiving from their environment versus the average consumer is pretty big, although they use their other senses quite a bit, but it's huge. So for people who can see, however, visual perception involves the observation of many product features, such as color, shape, size, and movement. When it comes to smell, no sense evokes more memory than smell. So sense can stir emotions, they can elicit memories, they can produce hunger, they induce relaxation, or even repel us. One thing that's interesting about smell is that some retailers have found great success by using certain smells in their store. I assume that Abercrombie and Fitch feel as though that they've achieved success with this. I can't even go in their stores. They smell so terrible to me. But other retailers do things like spray the vanilla scent, or just certain scents in their stores, where you go in the store and you immediately notice that scent. And it turns out research has shown that certain scents do affect how consumers shop, right? Some consumers feel more relaxed, some consumers spend more money, so on and so forth. Another sense is sound. Sound is important to marketers. Research shows that there are positive connections between the use of popular songs and ads and consumers' recall of those ads, which is huge. You wonder why some companies are using popular songs in their advertisements. It's because consumers remember those ads when those ads are using those songs. And research shows a positive connection between music and store sales. Um, so when you go into stores and they're playing certain music, they're playing the music very deliberately because they found that those particular songs work to increase store sales, and they could even work to increase consumers' perceptions of the stores themselves. Um, I know that for me, I've been known, if a store has really great music, maybe to spend a little bit more time in the store if I'm already in the store. Spend a little bit more time looking around, noticing things, which may and then turn into buying more things. And of course, research has shown a negative connotation between noise and sales. So if you go into a store and it's extremely noisy, that does affect product sales. This is one of the reasons that, I really don't want to shop on Black Friday, or I don't want to shop when companies have these huge sales, and I know a lot of people will be there. Not only do I not want to be around that many people, I get a little, I don't know if claustrophobic is the word, but I need personal space. And then I really don't like the noise. But I've always been that way. I've never been a shopper. Even as a little kid, I'd be like, take me home. I don't want to be here. Please, I don't want to be here. My mom was good about not being that big of a shopper. But my grandma and my aunt, both of whom I was very close to growing up, were quick to go shopping. My grandma loved Sears Outlet, so every Saturday morning, um, we would go to Sears Outlet, and I always went with her because she was my grandma and I loved her, and sometimes also because some of my other cousins would be around, and also there was. If I'm being honest, there was this guy who sold tamales outside of the Sears outlet. Hands down, some of the best tamales I've ever eaten in my life. And they were so cheap when I was growing up. It'd be like 50 cents a tamale. That guy was awesome. Anyway, random note for me. So taste, another sense, has an impact on the success of food and food beverages. We know that North Americans tend to have a preference for sweet and fatty foods, and that culture plays a powerful role in determining taste. If you've ever traveled abroad, one of the things that you'll notice quickly is that not only is the food different, right? Of course, different cultures have different foods, but food that you expect to be the same, or drinks that you expect to be the same, are different. You buy a Coke, and a Coke tastes very different in Mexico or in England or in France or Italy or somewhere like that than it does in America. And it's because Coke changes its recipe. They actually make, at least in the case of Europe, they make the product less sweet because Europeans don't like foods as sweet as we do, right? So they aren't walking around eating donuts, and even their desserts are less sweet, um, you know, more emphasis is placed on things like, the fruit that's in the product, so on and so forth. And then last but not least, our fifth sense, touch. There isn't really a lot of research on touch. I do know I've seen some presentations where people look at touch. There was this paper that came out in the Journal of Consumer Psychology, and they showed that consumers reacted favorably in a sports store. So if you were going to buy sports equipment or sports clothing, these kind of things, uh, consumers reacted positively when the sales associate gave them a small touch, let's say a pat on the arm or something like that. They saw an increase in sales. I'm a bit dubious. I don't want a salesperson touching me. I would find it really odd if they did, and in fact, I don't particularly like salespeople trying to sell me things. So I'm not saying the research is wrong, but the research was done in a country that is not the U.S. We tend to not like touch as much. And so I'd be interested in seeing what that same research looked like if they did it in the U.S. context, because Americans are notorious for wanting their space and not being touched by people we don't know. So anyway, again, not much research is done on touch. So let's move forward. Sensory marketing is actually kind of cool. It's marketing or advertising capable of engaging the senses of the customer and affecting their behavior, their judgment, or their perceptions. So, for example, when you walk into an Apple store, right, you are given this kind of perception that it's very high tech, that it's very modern, because they have this all white interior, very sleek looking, not a lot of clutter outside of all the people in the store. But they do that very much on purpose, right? Just like Starbucks. Starbucks chooses the type of music that's played in their stores, and all of their stores play the same songs, right? Or you could think of a store like Abercrombie and Fitch, which uses certain music. They have dim lighting. The main thing that always stands out for Abercrombie and Fitch, though, is the smell of the store. According to them and the research that they've done, these things, the scent, the dimness, the music, how loud it is, all attract younger adults, and actually kind of detract or yeah, basically detract older adults. Older adults don't want to go in a store and smell such an intense scent. Although I will say, this is a general idea of how things work in terms of sensory marketing. I've gone into an Abercrombie and Fitch store when I was younger, and I didn't like the smell then either. And then Dunkin' Donuts also uses sensory marketing. They actually, in South Korea, this is kind of cool. They had these scent emitters installed on buses that emitted the scent of Dunkin' Donuts coffee. And what they found is that they got this significant rise in sales because people would get off the bus in those locations at those specific bus stops and then grab a cup of coffee. So I thought this was a pretty interesting study, and I wanted to share it with you. It came out in the Journal of Marketing Research, I think JMR or JM, maybe JMR. It's on your notes. And it looks at what happens when consumers smell different ambient scents, so background scents, and how that affects food purchasing. And what they found I thought was really interesting. So essentially, what they show, and I have some questions about this, but this is what they show in the study, and they have several studies, maybe three and four. They show that when the background smell is indulgent, so in the left-hand corner, you see pizza, right? So when the background smell is indulgent, people are more likely to make a healthier choice. So you see the percent of total food purchasing is much higher when consumers are exposed to a pizza smell than when they're exposed to the smell of a non-indulgent choice, which is an apple, or no scent, which is what they call the control here. And frankly, when I say they, I mean all of us do. But so anyway, so you see that when people are in a situation where they have this ambient scent of an apple, or when they have no scent, they're about equally likely to choose unhealthy and healthy choices. But when the ambient scent is indulgent, in this case again a pizza, people are more likely to make healthy choices. The gap between the difference here, the gap is significant enough, about a 15% gap, which I think a lot of people could use that information. And maybe what it says is that, if you really want to eat healthier, maybe you need to fill your house with the smell of hamburgers and pizza. I don't know. That's what the data is telling me. I need to start doing this ASAP. So, what is perception? We define perception as the process of selecting, organizing, and interpreting sensations, sensations into a meaningful and coherent picture of the world. So, how we see the world around us. One thing to remember about perception is that not everyone perceives things the same way. So, two people may be exposed to the same stimuli or sensations, but recognize, organize, and interpret them differently based on their own needs, values, and expectations. So, for example, if we're walking down the street and I see a sign that says shoes $10 or less, that's really not going to get me going. But I have a friend who would insist that we stop the car. No joke. I mean, she sent me an article the other day telling me that Payless is coming back, and she's so excited. So, yeah, different people see things differently. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. Or different people perceive things differently, I should say. So this is another example of trying to figure out what's real. On the left, you see Justin Bieber for a Calvin Klein ad, and obviously his real self on the left versus the right is very different. He looks significantly more buff. His tattoos seem to kind of be more noticeable, so on and so forth. And then here's another actor whose name I cannot remember at all, but it's an example of what Photoshop can do. They say that, again, 68% of adults Photoshop themselves online. And so a lot of times we're competing with people, or we're trying to emulate people who aren't even their real selves. So, how do we perceive things? One commonly held view is what we call realism. We see the world as it is. We register sensory inputs and report them back. Another view that is deemed more accurate by most policymakers, lawyers, uh, marketers, academics, so on and so forth, is called naive realism. We believe we see the world as it is, but remember that perception is an active and somewhat constructive process. So we use prior information as well as our expectations, our goals and desires, so on and so forth, when interpreting incoming information. A great example of this would be the political arena, right? So if you watch a political debate, whether it's the Democratic debates or whether it's kind of the more advanced debates, with the Republican nominee and the Democratic nominee, how we perceive the debate and how we perceive what each person is saying often depends on the information that we already know and believe about those people. Something like a bombshell would have to go out for us to not support the candidate we went in supporting, right? So if you are a Trump supporter, for example, what Trump says, you probably will believe and support after a debate featuring Trump. On the other hand, if you are a supporter of Democrats, you will likely do the same for the Democratic nominee. And politicians use this information. They know this, right? And so one thing that happens in a lot of debates, particularly when we get down to the Republican versus Democratic nominee, is that they're not really saying anything, right? So you have a moderator who's asking questions, but when you actually sit down to look at the answers that are being given, there are no real answers being given, right? They kind of talk around the questions and pivot a lot and do things like this. And so you don't walk away with a real sense of any kind of answers. So it's kind of interesting. I started today's lecture talking a little bit about millennials and employment. I saw this and I had to put it in. I had to put it in the lecture. I'm sorry, I had to. So it's called the title. There's a clear generational divide on whether you should be expected to go above and beyond at work. And what you see is um, when people are younger, 18 to 29, more people, 67% of people tend to agree that employees should only do the work they are paid for, no more, no less. And people 60 or older say, hey, you should go above and beyond at work. And I don't fault
either group, right? So I'm sure that people who are 60 and over are saying you should go above and beyond. You should make sure your employer knows that you're a good employee, because that's how you move up in the company, and that's how you blah, 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 blah. I would argue that maybe younger people are a little bit more cynical, because we all know that everybody can't move up, right? Not everybody can be a manager. And maybe also younger people want a little bit more work-life balance. Again, another thing that stands out to me is maybe younger people aren't trying to develop these really loyal relationships with their employers, because they see them as employers, right? So it used to be in a lot of cases that a lot of companies, and when they still do, we're a family, yada, yada, yada. And I think maybe people are a little bit more cynical as to what that means. We've seen a bigger call for UBI, right? We've seen a bigger call for um, making more money, less work expectations, like a 4-day work week, these kind of things. I think momentum is shifting a little bit more with the employee, and this chart is kind of just a reflection of that.
A few slides ago, I think on the first slide, I talked about this idea that perception is important to marketers, and it is. It tends to be vital, and it really affects the success or failure of products in the marketplace, right? So, for example, how do you perceive Ford versus how do you perceive Toyota? Um, when I was growing up, Ford was an acronym, and people would say, found on roadside dead, but people believe that Toyota, lasts forever. Toyota products last forever. You, and now, living in Detroit, you don't see such a negative perception of Ford, right? People like Ford products, people buy Ford products. And so, is there a discrepancy between perceptions of Ford and Toyota? Absolutely. The question becomes what underlie those perceptions. One might be location. Detroit has Ford is headquartered in Detroit, and so perceptions are different. Um, on the other hand, people might know someone who's had a Toyota for 30 years, and so their perception is different. In order to understand, though, how perception affects the marketplace, we need to understand some basic concepts that underlie the perceptual process. So we'll talk about those in a few slides, or we'll begin to talk about those in a few slides. I'll have a think break on the next slide, something for you to think about. So every now and then you see these stories that, if you play a video backwards, you can hear, the devil's music, or if you look into a poster, you can see, some advertising for, it's always something religious when when it makes the news. I guess is what I'll say. And the people who bring these issues up will argue that this is subliminal perception. Subliminal perception occurs when the stimulus is below the level of the consumer's awareness, and that's why I mentioned earlier when Ashton Kutcher was saying something like this is subliminal advertising. It's not really subliminal advertising. If I see Ashton Kutcher with an Audi, or I see him with Evian water, I'm very aware of what I'm seeing, and obviously. Most of us can put two and two together, and realize that there's some level of advertising going on there. That said, not that said, in the past, certain advertisers have been accused of using subliminal advertising, um, and it can be effective. Research shows that people are stimulated below their level of conscious awareness, so you can be affected by things that you aren't consciously aware of. Um, and so it's a really interesting topic. The thing that we need to realize for this class, though, is that it is illegal. So subliminal advertising is illegal, and companies that do it will get in a lot of trouble, usually fines. So that brings us to the topic of perceptual selectivity
each day we are surrounded by stimuli, whether it's, I'm sitting in my living room right now. So whether it's my television or the chairs around me, whatever, we're surrounded by all kinds of things. And we are able to subconsciously exercise selectivity over what we actually perceive or what stimuli we pay attention to. So you might not pay attention to billboards on the highway, or this might be something you absolutely pay attention to or see out of the corner of your eye. Or if you're like me and you're walking down the street, you pay attention to almost nothing because I don't know, I'm just kind of focused, I guess. So, when we talk about perceptual selectivity, how do we decide subconsciously what we're going to pay attention to? Um, it depends on three factors. One, the nature of the stimulus. So, it's physical attributes, package design, brand name, so on and so forth. Our expectations. So, based on familiarity or past experience or expectations of what we should expect to see and what we should expect to kind of be exposed to. And then our motives. So, whether or not we have needs or wants for a particular object or service offering or anything, right? So, um, I mentioned before in another lecture that I love funnel cakes, so I'm always on the lookout for like a festival that might have one. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm joking. But one thing that I do pay attention to is sometimes when I'm walking, I'll pay attention to women's outfits, not necessarily to emulate the outfit, but to emulate the color pattern that they choose. I've noticed that a lot of people are a little bit more off the range in terms of putting funky colors together, and I tend to be kind of boring. And so I try to pay attention to that just in case, something kind of strikes my eye and I can try to emulate that. Little tidbit about myself. Along the lines of perceptual selectivity, there is also perceptual defense. Consumers subconsciously screen out stimuli that they find psychologically threatening, even though exposure has already taken place. So we can see something and then subconsciously try to uh, tune it out, right? Try to ignore it, so on and so forth. So we use perceptual defense, for example, for ads with intense fear appeals. If you go to European countries, if you go to Australia, for a while at least, they had these images on tobacco packages that were really psychologically threatening if you were a smoker, right? And even if you weren't, you're thinking, "Ooh, this is kind of gross." Research has shown over and over again that people will try to tune this out. Smokers have a reason to tune this out. They don't want to um, think about the dangers of smoking, especially if they're going to continue to smoke. If you're a non-smoker, you also try to tune this out because you don't smoke and you think because you don't smoke, you don't have to worry about these type of things. Um, Although to be fair, a lot of us have vices, and those vices have kind of it could have their own fear appeals if the government so chose. And so we also try to tune things like this out because it scares us, even though we don't smoke. Another term to be aware of, perceptual blocking. Consumers protect themselves from being bombarded with stimuli by tuning out or blocking such stimuli from conscious awareness. The difference between perceptual blocking and perceptual defense comes after seeing the stimuli takes place. Perceptual blocking attempts to avoid the stimuli altogether. So maybe you're walking through Times Square, and as you know, if you've been to New York, Times Square, you're bombarded with a lot of advertisements on buildings, on the streets, so on and so forth. Maybe what you decide to do is keep looking straight so that you don't see all the billboards on buildings. Or maybe you're keeping straight because you don't want to run into all of the people who are actors trying to get you to take pictures with them to pay them. You might use perceptual blocking if you're walking down a street with a lot of people
who are doing something like asking for money if are one of the people who don't give money to people who ask for money. Anyway, that's perceptual blocking, and that's the difference between perceptual blocking and perceptual defense. Perceptual distortions also affect perception. So, perceptual distortions are incorrect understandings or abnormal interpretations of a perceptual experience. I am going to actually show a video in class. I put the video in the slides here, similar to the product placement video. You'll see a link in the slide uh, just in case you want to watch the video on your own. There are some influences of perceptual distortion. One, physical appearances. There's a reason they place what are considered beautiful models in advertising, because they know that beautiful models tend to be very persuasive. People tend to say, hey, this product is associated with someone beautiful. It must be good, right? I must buy it, so on and so forth. Stereotypes also are big distortion factors. So we tend to have kind of these existing views of various kinds of stimuli, and we use these stereotypes to help us anticipate certain situations, people, or events, so on and so forth. It also influences how products are perceived, right? I have a stereotype against mint flavored stuff because I just always think it tastes like toothpaste. And so if you came up with a new product and you told me it was mint flavored, I will probably pass on it. Sorry. Another kind of factor when it comes to perceptual distortion would be first impressions. Our first impressions tend to be crucial for brands and people, frankly. They tend to be long lasting. It's hard to recover from a bad first impression, and it can be fatal for a brand. So when you're rolling out new products, when you're rolling out new brands, when you're rolling out new people, it doesn't matter what it is. You want to make sure that the first impression is the best impression, because people often remember that. And then last but not least, we tend to jump to conclusions, and this can distort information, right? We might not listen to all the information being presented before making a conclusion. I know I've talked about politics, but I have to mention this. I can't remember who it was. It had to be Romney or Barack Obama. Maybe it was Bill Clinton. I don't remember. Anyway, there was this political debate, and whoever the speaker was kept blinking, right? And so people spent a lot more time talking about the blinking than they did the actual debate performance. And a lot of people didn't listen to the information being kind of, you know, given to them by the debater, because they were so focused on the blinking, right? Um, we often do that. We often jump to these conclusions. We don't make kind of informed decisions. You might do it with, your favorite person. So your favorite person in the world tells you that X is a good thing. You like them, so you say X is a good thing too, even though X is a terrible thing. Anyway, so jumping to conclusions can kind of influence our perception, and lead to perceptual distortion. One process underlying perception is exposure. So, exposure is the process of bringing some stimulus within the proximity of a consumer so that it can be sensed by one of the five human senses. So, you can bring a smell or a picture, an advertisement, so on and so forth, within the proximity of a consumer. So, how do marketers gain exposure? We gain exposure through advertisements, through point of purchase displays, which are really important for cigarette companies. So, if you go and look at a grocery store or a gas station, if you look at the cigarette area, you'll see a lot of point of purchase um, signs and logos and so on and so forth to influence the consumer and gain exposure. We do it with shelf space. You go to the grocery store and you'll see not only point of purchase displays, but you'll see a certain amount of shelf space dedicated to certain products. Oftentimes, large amounts of shelf space uh, really influence exposure for the consumer. End caps, so end of shelf units, are one way of gaining exposure when it comes to shelf space. We gain exposure with logos, with freebies. So, giving out free products. We get a lot of free products here from Quicken Loans. So you go to the student bash at the beginning of the year, and Quicken Loans is giving you, a power cord or a cord for your what do you call those? An AUX cord. Or they're giving you pens or those stress balls, so on and so forth. Samples. You go to Costco or Sam's Club or somewhere like this, and they give you a sample of a product. Guerrilla marketing is another way we gain exposure. When companies use some kind of surprising or unconventional interactions to promote a product. We'll talk about that later. Viral advertising, although marketers haven't been really good at capturing exactly what makes something go viral. When you have something that does go viral, it tends to be pretty big and good for advertisers. I'm sure we can all think of something that's gone viral recently within the marketing world. And then product placement, so where you embed a product or a brand into something like a film or television, something like this. This is another way to gain exposure, and we'll talk more about it in a minute. Product placement in a minute. So, in the marketing information environment, there are a few types of ways that consumers are exposed to products. The first, or to information. The first is intentional exposure to marketing information. This is when consumers purposefully search for information relevant to a goal or problem they have. As an example, I wear lipstick about 50% of the time, and I will go online to search different lipstick products. If you're a gamer, you might go online to search different games. If you like something like sewing, you might go online to search for patterns or ideas. We all know different products and things that we've searched online for, and this would be called intentional exposure to marketing information because this information may affect kind of your future purchases, your future consumption, so on and so forth. We can also have accidental exposure to marketing information where you accidentally or unexpectedly encounter marketing information within your environment. So you see marketing information at bus stops, at event endorsements, so on and so forth. So, for example, you could be reading a magazine and you're clicking through an article that you like to read or swipe, passing by reading an article that you're interested in, and embedded in the article you see an advertisement for shampoo, or you see an advertisement here for underwear, so on and so forth. These things are called accidental exposure. A lot of times marketing information is provided to you accidentally, right? Not that we don't search for marketing information, it's just that there's so much marketing in the world, you're constantly being exposed to some kind of marketing information. I mean, even something as simple as walking in the classroom and seeing people with shirts on with different companies and logos. This is accidental exposure to marketing information. So there are marketing actions that can be taken to influence exposure or consumers' exposure to marketing stimuli. The first is to facilitate intentional exposure. So when consumers are searching for marketing information, you can provide promotions and or sales ads, right? So let's say I go to Target's website and I decide that what I really want to do is buy curtains. And when I pull up curtains, I see that Target is having a home sale for 25% off all home goods. That is going to influence me. Let's say I'm looking at curtains, and on the side of the page, they show that they're a sales ad where curtain rods are on sale. That will influence me. You can have elaborate product brochures, and this tends to be important for expensive products, right? So when someone wants to buy an RV, let's say they've decided to retire and travel across the U.S. or they've finished college and they've decided to do it, or they've never finished college, all these different scenarios. Anyway, they want an RV. When you're selling something like an expensive RV, right? Not a second-hand inexpensive one, but for an expensive RV, you're going to want to provide a product brochure. I could see you also wanting to do that if you're trying to sell something like timeshares or something like um, I don't know. Name something expensive that people might buy that you might need product brochures. I guess you can think about it. I came up with two examples. Ooh, kind of ran out of examples. You could also facilitate intentional exposure with well-trained salespeople. And you see this when you go to, a car dealership or different places like this. You have these well-trained salespeople. They know the cars inside out. Hopefully, they know financing and this kind of thing inside out as well. You can also have in-store seminars to help people understand the product. I think Sprint and a couple of other cell phone providers started these seminars to help people understand how to use their cell phones in an effort to get people to want to buy more expensive cell phones. So, for example, I probably, if they had much cheaper options, would stick with those. I don't really do a lot on my cell phone. Um, so on and so forth. For accidental exposure, what you want to do as a marketer is you want to maximize accidental exposure. So you can increase the number of ads in an area. If you know people in a certain area like to do some things, you can use that information to place ads there. If you're trying to get people to go to a party, you might put more ads on a college campus, right? Than you would in the general population or in a general area. For example, you can locate retail stores in high traffic areas. We see something like this happening with downtown Detroit right now. We see more retailers coming. I think you see the population of people at least living and then kind of coming to downtown has increased some. So that being said, downtown recently got an H&M, a Madewell, a Lululemon. Is that what they call it? Lululemon. You think I know? I live close to it. Um, they also have always had the Nike store. I think you'll see more retailers come, and that it's just a matter of time. So, and then of course you can increase your number of things like product placements in movies and TVs and mobile advertising. Movies and TV shows are important, not TVs, TV shows, I should say, are important. Mobile advertising, however, is huge. Think how often people use their cell phones. People are starting to do things like look for coupons. A lot of people shop on their phones. So mobile advertising is huge, and as huge as it is, I still think it's somewhat untapped. So I think in the coming years you'll see more happening with mobile advertising.